Welcome back to another episode of 40 Facts About the 40K Universe. I am your host, Gersh1, and you are watching One Mind Syndicate. Today we continue talking about Space Marine chapters as we get into the Steel Confessors. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. We post Warhammer 40K content every single day. And of course, if you have any suggestions, just comment down below. But with that said, let's get into 40 facts on the Steel Confessors. The Steel Confessors is a loyalist Space Marine chapter, secretly founded during the 36 Millennium's 19th founding by the Adeptus Mechanicus for its own use. This chapter comes from the gene seed of the Iron Hands. The Steel Confessors primarily wear metallic silver power armor. The shoulder plate trim is dark green. The Steel Confessors chapter badge consists of a black cross, a white lightning bolt surmounted in the middle of a red oval. The cross is centered on a field of bone white. The Steel Confessor Space Marine chapter has very inauspicious beginnings. In an effort to better protect their forge worlds and private interests, the Adeptus Mechanicus took it upon themselves to create a secret chapter of Space Marines that only bore loyalty to Mars and the Cult Mechanicus. Using Iron Hand's gene seed collected from the chapter's tithes to Mars, the Mechanicus began work on a chapter that was intended to rival the strength and power of any other Imperial force in the galaxy. The chapter is an unintended successor chapter of the Iron Hands, since the Steel Confessors were created from their gene seed. They were chosen because the Iron Hands were the first founding Space Marine Legion that had close ties and beliefs to those of the Adeptus Mechanicus, and so were considered to be of good source material for the creation of the Mechanicus' own private army of Astartes. Feeling that they were often forced to follow unfair rules and regulations as laid down by the High Lords of Terra, the Adeptus Mechanicus named their newly created chapter the Steel Confessors. Unfortunately for the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Inquisition discovered their secret plot to create a private Space Marine chapter and reported the act to the High Lords of Terra. After much deliberation, the High Lords decreed that despite the Adeptus Mechanicus having greatly overstepped their mandate, they would be allowed to keep their newly created chapter, with certain limitations. The Steel Confessors were first required to take the same vows of fealty and loyalty to the Imperium of Man that bound all other Space Marine chapters, and to separate itself organizationally from the Adeptus Mechanicus so that it operated as a truly independent chapter, just like all the others. Though the Mechanicus was not pleased by these edicts of the High Lords, they begrudgingly agreed to Terra's terms, so as to avoid a potential conflict which both Mars and Terra could ill afford in the tumultuous days of the 36 Millennium and the Age of Apostasy. Like their forebearers among the Iron Hands, the Steel Confessors are utterly intolerant of physical or mental weaknesses in others, and least of all in themselves. One notable incident occurred when the chapter actually destroyed the Talaran 54th Regiment of the Imperial Guard for failure to achieve objectives. For taking up arms against the Emperor's servants, the Steel Confessors have once again found themselves under investigation by the Inquisition. This intolerance of weakness manifests most notably in a distinct preference for high levels of cybernetic replacements of the healthy portions of their bodies with augmetic bionics, which is quite a commonplace practice within the chapter, as is with the Iron Hand successors as well. Spiritually, the chapter believes in a divine trinity that is a modified version of the faith held by the Adeptus Mechanicus. This trinity is composed of the Machine God, the universal spirit of knowledge that provides strength to all, the Emperor of Mankind, who stands as a physical embodiment of knowledge incarnate, and the Machine God in the universe as the Omnissiah, and their Primarch Ferrus Manus, the greatest prophet of the Machine God. The Steel Confessors still maintain extremely close ties with the Adeptus Mechanicus, embracing all primary beliefs of the Cult Mechanicus wholeheartedly. The majority of other Space Marine chapters frown upon the Steel Confessors' obscene reverence for the mechanical and the physical embodiments of knowledge, just as they frown upon those chapters who adopt the Imperial Creed and revere the Emperor as a god, rather than as a father, an inspiration, and humanity's greatest guide. The Steel Confessors' relationship with the Adeptus Mechanicus, due to the nature of their illicit founding, is rumored to be even closer than that enjoyed by the Iron Hands. Because of this close relationship, the Steel Confessors are provided with an excellent supply of the finest heavy arms, armor, war machines, and equipment that the manufactorums of Mars can currently produce. Like all true scions of Ferrus Manus, the Steel Confessors are notoriously harsh on their neophytes, broking no signs of weakness or failure within them. Those neophytes who do not live up to the harsh training regime of the chapter, or those that falter or fail in their superior's judgment, will either die in the process of being trained or will later be lobotomized and transformed into a cybernetic servitor to continue to serve the chapter in some fashion. The Steel Confessors are most well known for valiantly defending their original chapter homeworld, the Forge World of Crassus IV, from the attack of the first Tyranid assault upon the Imperium, High Fleet Behemoth. Unfortunately, the Tyranids proved to be too much for the Steel Confessors, and despite the valiant defense put up against these Xenos horrors by the chapter, they were forced to retreat from their homeworld, and watched as all its biomass was absorbed by the High Fleet before moving on. The battle was costly for the chapter, and cost the life of its chapter master at that time, Protonus. Yet the chapter survived and built a new home upon the Forge World of Kelvala. In the 41st millennium, the Steel Confessors faced a new Tyranid menace, this time in the form of High Fleet Leviathan. The battle for Kelvala was once again fought on the Steel Confessors' own homeworld against the invading Tyranids, though this time the chapter determined that there would be a very different outcome when they faced off against this great devourer. The entire chapter of the Steel Confessors successfully engaged in battle against the Tyranids of the Leviathan. The world of Kelvala was very important to the chapter. It was home to the Steel Confessors' Fortress Monastery, their chapter's gene seed stores, a major Adeptus Mechanicus manufactorum complex, as well as a full psychic choir of astropaths that boosted the Astronomicon to allow navigation through the difficult currents in the Immaterium, created by the Tyranid hive mind's psychic shadow in the warp. This being the chapter's homeworld, there was no other choice other than to defend it in open battle from the forces of the Tyranid High Fleet. The battle was colossal and brutally straightforward, with each of the 10 companies of the Steel Confessors taking up defensive positions around the Mechanicus Manufactorums and their fortress monastery, while the Tyranid horde attacked unrelentingly in an attempt to overwhelm the Astartes' firing lines. Despite the incalculable number of Tyranids present at Kelvala, the disciplined regime of volley fire from the Steel Confessors' tactical marines and the Devastator squads, combined with surgical counterattacks by the assault squads, veteran squads of the 1st Company, and land speeder squadrons flying between battlefield locations to lend their firepower to those companies that were struggling. Eventually, they thinned out the Tyranid hordes while minimizing Space Marine casualties. The Tyranids finally depleted their own numbers after consistently throwing themselves without regard into the stained fire of the Astartes' guns. At the end of the battle, the 8th and 10th companies of the Steel Confessors had been utterly wiped out. The 1st Company was at 40% operational strength, and the 3rd and 6th companies were at 60%, while the rest of the chapter's companies still possessed between 20 to 40% of their standard operational strength. Yet Kelvala had held against the swarm, and the Leviathan soon moved on to seek easier prey. The Steel Confessors still had possession of their homeworld, and there would be no retreat of the humiliation that had been suffered on Crassus IV. And those were 40 facts on the Steel Confessors. The first thing I thought of when I read this lore is, how did the Adeptus Mechanicus get away with this? But we have to remember that this happened during the Age of Apostasy. And if you don't have background knowledge of the Age of Apostasy, it was a time when a member of the Imperial Creed took over the Imperium, and the Imperium was very corrupt. A lot of organizations during this time were pressured by Van Dyer, which was the High Lord, or the ruler basically of the Imperium, and they were harassed basically by the Imperium, which was run by this evil corrupt guy, that's why the Adeptus Mechanicus would do this in the first place. And secondly, corruption would probably, turn a blind eye to the fact that the Adeptus Mechanicus are trying to protect themselves by creating a Space Marine Legion. Because even the Space Marine chapters themselves during the Age of Apostasy didn't really like Vandire, and they were very against him. They didn't openly go to war with him and the Imperium, but they did not like the fact that he was the ruler, and he took it by corrupting means. He basically joined the High Lords and the Adeptus Ministorum, and it was just horrible time, I guess you could say. So that's why the Adeptus Mechanicus were able to do this. Whether that connection is still around, who knows, because this Space Marine chapter, after their devastating losses, was probably pretty small. Not to mention that I think Call being from the Adeptus Mechanicus, being or wanting to become Fabricator General, kind of speaks to the fact that the Adeptus Mechanicus has always been trying to maneuver their way or put themselves in a position where they can take over the Imperium. Now, Call seems to be wanting to do that, but of course Guilliman is never going to allow that. And now that Guilliman is around, the Adeptus Mechanicus can kiss the idea of taking control of the Imperium goodbye. But yeah, really cool chapter, and I hope you get inspired to either add on to your chapter, create this chapter, or what have you. Again, if you have any suggestions for other topics of Warhammer 40K that you guys would like us to talk about, comment down below. The announcement for the giveaway winner of the No Fear box set is coming up pretty soon, as well as another giveaway. So don't forget to subscribe. But you're probably a subscriber if you stayed this long to listen to us. With that said, guys, I'll see you tomorrow. This was Gersh1 with One Mind Syndicate signing out.